Good morning and welcome. For those that I haven't had the privilege of meeting before, my name is Bill Rosehart and I have the honor of being the Dean of the Schulich School of Engineering here at the University of Calgary. I am very pleased that you're able to join us for our fifth Schulich Connects of the 2021-2022 academic year, Cleantech, Engineering a Healthier Planet. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region here in Southern Alberta. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. I now have the privilege to take time to recognize the recipient of our 2021 Schulich Leadership Excellence Award. This honor was bestowed upon Margaret Clark for her significant impact in the community, outstanding achievement, and determined leadership. She was the longest serving donor here at the Schulich School of Engineering and established the Robert P. Paw Memorial Bursary in Engineering in 1987 and the Robert B. Paw Memorial Scholarship in Engineering in 2006 in memory of her first husband who had just graduated at the time of his passing. Margaret contributed annually to these two awards up until her passing in February 2021. She was grateful to meet the recipients of these awards and kept stacks of correspondence from past student winners. There have been over 80 recipients of Margaret's awards. Her son, David Clark, has accepted the award on her behalf, and we will now play his thoughtful video message.
Hi, I'm David Clark, and I am very pleased and humbled today to accept this award, the Schulich Engineering Leadership Award, on behalf of my mother, Margaret Clark. Unfortunately, Mom passed away a year ago this month and was unable to be here, of course, today. But I know that she would be thrilled, she would be humbled, and very much honored to receive this award. So this is what it looks like. It's a beautiful transparent clock, and it'll look wonderful on the mantle in honor of this award. So I wanted to, first of all, thank the Schulich School of Engineering and specifically Dean Rosehart for nominating my mother for this award. If you would indulge me, I'd like to take a few minutes just to tell a little bit about my mother's story, because her relationship with the engineering school is probably not typical. So Mom graduated from the U of A with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing back in 1955. And there she met a young engineer, Robert Paw, who had a diploma from tech school and then went on to take engineering at the U of A. They both graduated in 1955. They were married shortly thereafter, moved to Calgary. Bob worked for Calgary Power, which is now TransAlta. And I understand that his work involved a lot of initiating the remote control and monitoring of hydroelectric plants throughout southern Alberta. But sadly and unexpectedly, Bob passed away at the age of 33, leaving Margaret as a widow with 3 young children in a time when it was difficult to be a single parent. But Margaret wanted to do something to remember Bob, something that the world could remember him. And so 1966 was the year that the University of Calgary was born, and she met with Dr. Neville, who was the original Dean of Engineering at the faculty, and they created the Robert Burns Paw Memorial Bursary. And for the next 55 years, Mom would sit at her kitchen table and write a check each year to support students who had financial need and might not otherwise be able to continue their education. Many of those students would write letters of thanks. Mom kept every single one of them. And I've got a folder here with well over 100 letters. Many of these letters, particularly from the early days, were handwritten and tell the story of young folks who needed that extra help in order to get their engineering degree. So Mom remarried a few years later. She married Malcolm Clark, and Malcolm was a widower, and he had 4 kids, and so together they raised a family of 7 kids. Malcolm had been unable to go to university because of financial pressures on his family, and so this bursary continued to be important to them. They often would try to meet with the students who received the bursary, even to the point of inviting them home for dinner. And sometimes they would come for a home cooked meal, share their story, have conversation. And so it wasn't just send a check, there was a personal involvement there as well. But you know, Mom's leadership and personality was not just this one thing. Margaret and Malcolm were philanthropists, and even though they were of somewhat moderate means and had a large family, they continued to support many different charities, everything from the Red Cross to Operation Eyesight to Cancer Society to church work to Stars Ambulance. They had many different charitable interests. Mom was a community volunteer. She did a lot of her volunteering through the church, everything from being the camp nurse to the board secretary to visiting the sick. When her children were grown, she took on a role with the Alberta Children's Hospital, and she volunteered there for over 30 years. And so, again, a record holder as one of their longest serving volunteers at the Alberta Children's Hospital. And she did that into her 80s until she was no longer able to do that. So it's our family's desire to continue the bursary, and we will do what we can to honor Dad's memory, as well as the memory of Margaret and Malcolm Clark and their interest and advocacy for the engineering community. So I hope today this story of my mom's and her faith, her generosity, her compassion, and her leadership, I hope that it has been a small inspiration to you today. And again, I just thank you for this award. Thanks.
Such a touching tribute. Thank you, David. Your mother's legacy will continue to live on here at the Schulich School of Engineering. Turning now to today's panel. We hear a lot about clean tech and its importance, but experts don't always agree on what it is and how it can best have a positive impact. Today's moderator and panel will be talking about these issues and much more. If you have any questions at any time, please type them into the Q&A function at the bottom of the webinar, and our moderator, Aaron, will ask those questions throughout the panel. So don't wait till the end. If you have a question, type it in. We are recording this session, and we will be making it available in the coming days. I'd now like to take a moment to introduce our moderator, Dr. Aaron Sen. Aaron is the department head of Chemical and Petroleum Engineering here at the Schulich School of Engineering and past associate dean. In addition to be a proven leader, he is an award-winning teacher and researcher. It is now my pleasure to pass the microphone over to Dr. Sen, who will introduce us today's panelists and get things going. Aaron?
Thank you so much, Dr. Rosehart, for that kind introduction. It is my privilege today to be the moderator of the Schulich Connects session entitled Cleantech, Engineering a Healthier Planet. And to everyone who has joined us here for this exciting event, welcome. So Cleantech. So Cleantech, it's an amalgamation of the words clean and technology, and it seems as though we hear this term a lot these days. The term Cleantech was actually introduced over 20 years ago. It was in the late 1990s by the venture capital investment community. And then it was popularized during the early to mid 2000s by the Cleantech group and other groups such as CleanEdge and publications such as the Cleantech Revolution. Today, the term Cleantech has entered the vernacular, not only in Canada, but globally. And whereas it can apply to many areas, in general, it's used to as a reference to improving environmental sustainability. And certainly, you know, if we hear a lot about clean tech right here in Alberta. So a couple of examples that come to mind: late last year, there was a release of the Alberta Energy Transition Study that was commissioned by Calgary Economic Development and Global Edmonton in partnership with Prairie's Economic Development Canada, which identified Alberta as already having significant activity in clean tech and indicated that further investment in the clean tech sector could translate to huge job creation and a multi-billion-dollar contribution to provincial GDP over the next few decades. And then just a short time ago, in January of this year, there was an announcement of over $3 million in funding towards the clean tech sector in Alberta, including a new energy transition center in downtown Calgary, which is actually a collaboration between the University of Calgary, Innovate Calgary, Avatar Innovations, and the energy industry. And the goal of the Energy Transition Center is to help small and medium-sized businesses develop clean energy technologies in direct support of Canada's net zero commitments. So whereas these are just a couple of recent local stories, you can find stories about clean tech from around the world. And as the world becomes increasingly dependent upon technology to help impede climate change and achieve sustainability goals, it's clear that engineers will play a key role in developing and implementing clean tech solutions to create a healthier planet, which is what leads us to our event today. So what I'm going to do is something that is a little bit different than what we normally do. To get things started, I'm going to ask for a little audience participation. On your screens right now, you can see a slide that was put together by Nicole and our communications team. Thank you, Nicole. And it's got a QR code. So please grab your phone and you can scan that with your reader, hit that QR code, and it'll take you to a website called Slido. Alternatively, you can just type slido.com into your browser and then hit #connects to get to the same screen. And when you're there, there's a question which asks you about your definition of clean tech. And rather than a definition, I would just ask that you put in keywords. You can enter as many keywords as you want. And we will form a word cloud just to get an impression of what the audience believes clean tech to be. And the reason that I'm asking this, and it speaks to what Bill was saying, if you go online looking for a definition of clean tech, which I did, you will realize that there are so many different definitions and people have very different perspectives on this. So given that you're an audience that elected to come to an event about clean tech, I'm very interested in learning your thoughts on this term. So far you can see the word cloud on there. So the word sustainable has come up more than any other word. Okay, we'll give everyone just another minute or so. Carbon neutral, net zero, environmentally friendly. No emissions. Yes, so this is very interesting. So it seems clear just based on the responses we have so far that really the word clean tech is synonymous with sustainable. That seems to be the one main word that we see in here. Okay, what I'm going to do is keep going. If you want to enter more keywords, please do so, and we'll keep a record of this slide. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to turn things over to the panel. Thank you very much for participating on that. But really, you're not here to listen to me. Like you, I would like to hear from our esteemed panel of clean tech experts, who I will now introduce. So first, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Bailey. So Stephanie is the Executive Director of Alberta of Foresight Canada, a clean tech accelerator. She has over 20 years of professional environmental experience in both Canada and the US. She has demonstrated expertise in environmental policy and sustainable program development strategy as a member of industry, a consultant, and as an employee of a regulatory agency. Welcome, Stephanie. Next, we have Dr. Stephen Bryant. He's a professor in the Department of Chemical and Petroleum Engineering and the University of Calgary's first Canada Excellence Research Chair. Dr. Bryant leads an interdisciplinary research group in materials engineering for unconventional oil reservoirs, and with a team of national and international collaborators, he is bringing together advances in fields such as nanotechnology, novel materials, and microbiology to reimagine how society can benefit from hydrocarbon resources with reduced environmental impact. Welcome, Stephen. Next, we have Dr. Sean McCoy. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Chemical and Petroleum Engineering here in the Schulich School of Engineering. His work includes life cycle assessment and techno-economic assessment of direct air capture, carbon dioxide conversion technologies, hydrogen production pathways, and energy systems analysis to evaluate potential technology futures. Welcome, Sean. And last but certainly not least, we have Candice Paton. She is the Executive Director for Regulatory Affairs and External Relations at Enhance Energy, an Alberta-based carbon management company with extensive experience in planning and implementation of large-scale carbon capture. and utilization projects that permanently sequester CO2 emissions. She founded the Alberta Carbon Hub, a project designed to highlight the innovative steps Alberta companies are taking to solve climate change. And she is also a graduate of the Schulich School of Engineering, having completed an M.Sc in the Department of Chemical and Petroleum Engineering, which is when I first met her. Welcome, Candice. All right, so with that, what I've done is I prepared a few questions for the panelists, but as Dr. Rosehart mentioned, I would encourage the audience to ask questions. You can use the Q&A feature at the bottom at any time during this. I'll be able to see the questions. I believe the panelists will be able to see the questions, and if they see something that they can answer straight away, they're going to jump in and just answer it, just to have a conversational tone to this particular panel. And if they don't, I'll convey the questions to them. So, panelists, welcome here this morning. I think I want to start off by asking you exactly what I asked the audience to do, and not keywords, but I'm going to throw out, can you please ask or answer, what is your definition of clean tech? And I'm happy to have anyone start. Who wants to start that?
I'm always happy to start, Aaron.
Oh, thanks, Steve.
I'm not shy. My definition, Aaron, is there is no such thing as clean tech. And you're going to say, well, okay, that's not helpful. I learned this from Chief Clarence Louie at the Soyuz Indian Band. He says what I just said, there's no such thing. There is cleaner tech. And there's a lot to unpack there. I'm not going to take up the time right now to do it, but there's a lot that goes with that, I think. And that's the definition I like. There's no such thing.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. I should have probably touched base with you about that before I introduced clean tech. Now, so we have clean tech doesn't really exist. Does someone want to take a different view?
I'll jump in. Sorry, Stephanie, I just got ahead of you here. I think I take actually kind of an opposite view. I think there's a lot of clean tech out there, and I'd say anything that has a net environmental benefit compared to the status quo could be defined as clean tech. But what I think is the complex part about clean tech is that what we call clean tech today, an improvement on the status quo, might not be clean tech tomorrow. When we think about CCUS and whether that's CCS with EOR or CCS into saline aquifers, those are going to help get us towards net zero, but they won't get us all the way there. So I would say something like CCS is definitely clean tech today, but will it be clean tech in 2050? Maybe not. And so I think that temporal aspect of clean tech becomes really important to the discussion.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Candice. When I think about clean technology, I have a very broad definition of clean tech. The word cloud had everything that I consider clean tech and more. From the standpoint of a clean tech accelerator, what we're really looking for are solutions. We're looking for ways to mitigate environmental impacts of existing processes or to provide alternatives for our existing processes that are more environmentally friendly. You mentioned things like CCUS and technologies that abate emissions. When we're looking at clean tech, we take a much broader lens. We look at water security. We look at water recycle and reuse. We look at waste reduction. We look at circular economy. We look at even crop yields and soil improvements. So it really is about everything involved in the environment and how we interact with the environment.
Yeah, I would add that I think I agree with much of what's been said. And I think that also we're being somewhat academic in the sense that we're trying to define something which is chosen by investors in the marketplace. So, right, we can all sit down and we can say what's clean tech and what's not, but it's clean tech is sort of an investment thesis, right? People, that's usually the context in which it's used, right? The government uses clean tech in the context of, we want to grow a clean tech industry. We want to attract investment. So I think investors are looking at what is marketed as clean tech. They may also be trying to understand what is actually, quote unquote, bringing environmental benefits. But I think there's also a big dimension to this, which is the market. And I wonder if that's what Stephen was actually trying to get at with this provocative, there is no such thing comment. But I think the point is that it is something which we can define all we want, but it's about what do investors put their money in and say that's clean tech.
Oh, there's a lot there, but Sean, I'll just say this. When you replay the tape, I think what I said and what Candice said and what Stephanie said are actually the same thing. Cleaner tech is a reasonable definition, but we could spend the next 45 minutes, we could spend the next rest of the day on my other definition would be anything that Stephanie's got in her accelerator is clean tech, right? But that raises a lot of interesting issues with how we actually do ESG, environment, social, and governance accounting, and that's an interesting topic. I'll just stop there, Sean. But you're right. There's this whole other lens of this. It's usually presented as an economic opportunity, and I won't throw another bomb yet, but I have more to say about that.
Okay, so very interesting perspectives, and interesting that we have some different perspectives there, even though you acknowledge that they're all the same. So I guess the next question on my mind is, assuming that clean tech does exist, or cleaner tech, what would you say is the current state of clean tech in Canada? Let's start in Canada. Who wants to start that one?
I would say, people lose sight of this because we're living through it. But what I've been telling audiences for a couple of years now is an amazing thing happened, and a lot of it started here in Canada. 2018, 2019, when oil companies, many of them now headquartered here in Calgary, declared their intentions to run their operations to net zero, often with a time scale attached. That's an extraordinary series of statements. I've been in CO2 issues for 25 years. I never saw that one coming. So, and Shell with the Quest project being one of the flagships, what's happening over Boundary Dam, et cetera. There's a lot of happening in the CCUS space right here, and has gathered momentum. And so I think there's a lot going on just on that side of things.
One of the things I notice in Canada is that clean tech is sort of galvanized this cross-sectoral perspective. And I think that's really exciting because we're seeing startups that are able to pivot and apply the thinking and the knowledge that they've got from one sector to another and see improvements in whether it's water use or land use or air pollution or the way we do healthcare or whatnot can all be sort of this idea about clean tech. And I think that's really exciting for people because they see this opportunity to actually jump in and contribute and, help with the world that they want to see in the future. And so that's something that's really exciting about clean tech, and I think a really powerful draw. The flip side of that, and I think something Canada really has to wrestle with, is that we seem to look for these silver bullets. Clean tech, there's a hunt for the right answer that's going to get us to net zero. And there's this constant sort of in the regulatory and the policy and the political realm, sort of finding what is the best solution and what are we going to do to position Canada for a future. And it becomes such a binary conversation. And I think that's really challenging because our climate change goals are huge, but they also, need to take into consideration the broader context around environment, around land use, around water use. And that becomes a really important conversation. The social components of it, our healthcare components of what clean tech can do for us, become a really broad silver buckshot, not silver bullet type conversation. And so I think the state of clean tech in Canada is exciting, but until we actually hold space for a more complex discussion of how many solutions are going to contribute to the future that we want to see, I worry that we're putting in policies and programs that are really trying to have a very much more simplistic binary kind of conversation.
Can I pick up one quick point on the early thing that Candice just said? What I changed my background, that's from a video that Ever Technologies, who figured out how to do geothermal energy scalably, put out early when they were getting going. And they did exactly what Candice just described. They took drilling technology, figured out how to do some really interesting stuff to make geothermal scalable. And they started here and they are growing fast and doing things all over the world. So the good news is exactly what you said, Candice. There are ways to do this cross-sectoral, cross-fertilization. And geothermal is nice and clean and long-lasting. So there's a lot to be said for it. And it all happens underground.
I think when I think about this question, I'm going to take more of a market perspective. The state of clean tech in Canada, we see a lot of great clean tech ventures and startups coming out of Vancouver. They've got a very mature market compared to a lot of Canada. Quite a few good things coming out of Toronto as well. But what we're seeing in Alberta and throughout the prairies is an uptick in startups. We're seeing people really interested in transitioning their careers. We've seen a lot of consolidation of the energy sector in Alberta in the last few years. And a lot of the startups that we see coming through the accelerator programming are people, they're engineers, they're people who know how to solve problems. And they're taking a different approach. They're looking at utilizing their talents and their abilities and wanting to start up companies to solve some of the problems that the large companies have. A lot of the oil and gas companies don't have an R&D team. They have some people that are focused on clean technology and they can do economic assessments and can make recommendations, should we put this into our programming? But they don't actually have teams that can go out and fiddle with things and to make things in their backyard garage. And what we're really seeing from these clean tech program folks is that they need industry partners. They need people that are willing to take a risk on them, particularly in the prairies, particularly in the energy sector. We need adoption of those technologies through pilots, and we need large-scale commercialization. And to that extent, I think Canada has a lot of growth to do. We see a lot of angel investment and a lot of venture capital in the US, particularly in the high-tech sector. When you're looking at computer programming, I would love to see that kind of support and development of what we're calling clean tech in Canada.
Yeah, I would just, I think I would like to kind of also say, I see what Stephanie sees, right, as well. I came here from California, from the Bay Area, and I see the environment here in Calgary and the environment there being radically different in terms of the risks people are willing to take in terms of investing into these technologies, and the ecosystem, right? Very different, right? I do see, I think I've had conversations with people who have also, I know there are lots of companies in Calgary who can think if we went to Vancouver, went to the coast, right? To actually innovate and build their technologies out because they couldn't find it here. And what I do see here is a lot of the innovation is innovation, it's innovative, but it's incremental off the back oftentimes of oil and gas tech, which is what I think we just heard Stephanie, I think you said, sort of there are engineers, there are people who have good ways of doing things better, but it's sort of doing what we do now better, which is good. That's important innovation to have. But there's also sort of the more radical types of innovation that we think of, if we look back at like the 2009, 2010, last time we saw a very big explosion in clean tech funding that kind of we saw things being tried there that maybe were more, greenfield sort of ideas. And so it's interesting to see how that, like the nature of what's being innovated and how that comes out of the existing industry, and the ecosystem that we have is different in different places in Canada.
I would like to emphasize Stephanie's point as well, because it comes back to something Candice said earlier. Meanwhile, we've got to do this fast. 2050 is around the corner, okay? And so is 2030, there's commitments there. And figuring out a way to do this innovation faster. And so I really like the idea of startups, people just trying stuff and getting to learn fast by being able to try things out so that we can allocate resources, whether financial or human, more effectively. But that's the other key part of all this. We've got to be moving much faster than we used to. Learning new things and then building them once we figure out what we want to build.
Yeah, and Stephen, if I can jump in on that fast piece, I opened up my comments talking about the definition of clean tech and this sort of temporal response we need to have. And that's something that's on my mind all the time, the time and the speed at which we have to move if we really want to address our climate change goals. We're starting to see targets forming around 2030, 2040, 2050, but it's 2022 and we have very little deployed in Canada. And I think a lot about that report that came out from the IEA and our net zero by 2050 and some of the scenarios that they've planned. The piece that struck me the most from that report was the comment about how we have about 50% of the technologies today to get started. And we haven't thought of 50% of the technologies that we're going to need to get us all the way there. And what I take from that is we need to move on the ones that we have in place today. And they're not necessarily the ones that will get us all the way there, but we have to be reducing barriers to deployment. We have to be moving on the things that we know how to do today and know how to do well, even if they're not 100% perfect, just to put us in position to get to that 2030 goal, which will hopefully then allow us to see a pathway to that 2050 goal and not constantly be playing catch up.
Since you mentioned the net zero pathway, the IEA, and I know Stephanie and Sean have read it too, they said something else I think is important for us to recognize here, even though this is the Schulich School of Engineering Connects. What we know and what the IEA report put in there is that they say there's going to be a lot of behavioral changes as well. That's nothing to do with technology per se. So this is a big mission, and it's got a big social component as well as a technological component. So we need to recognize that as well. Silver buckshot, yes, and people have to be willing to, pull that trigger and do things differently than we've done them in the past.
But I would add one point, Stephen. I think that there's a lot of tech which influences behavior, right? Like if we think about, many of you probably read Nudge, right? The book talking about how framing problems, framing choices, just the way we frame those can change our answer and move us towards better outcomes, right? And I certainly don't think about our recent experiences here. I won't get into too much, but with COVID, I'm not sure we've all read that book. But in any case, I think the idea that there's tech out there, right? We look at a lot of consumer-facing tech, maybe in the 2009-10 sort of world, which was invested in. You think of Nest thermostats, right? And Alphabet bought into them, right? Google, all kinds of consumer-facing tech that tried to change our ability to respond to energy pricing and demands in the market, right? Those are sort of, in some sense, that's sort of the behavior, inciting some level of behavior change, right? It means that that consumers, whether they're individuals or businesses, can be more flexible in our response to things, and that's enabled by technology. So I agree with you. There are very deep behavioral shifts that are being talked about, and but some of those can also be supported through smart technology.
25% less use of energy on transportation in 2050. That's in that roadmap. I don't think we're going to get there with tech.
Okay, this is a great discussion.
Oh yeah, Aaron, you're still there. Okay, sorry.
yeah. No, I'm really not. You guys are the one. They're here. Everyone's here to listen to you. I'm here to listen to you and learn from you. So let me just take that question just a step further. I had asked the question about at a high level, what are things like in Canada, and when I refer back to the documents that I had mentioned about the Alberta Energy Transition Study and so on. It talks about all of the clean tech that's going on in Alberta right now. And, it references, there's over 900 companies here right now, mostly concentrated around Calgary and Edmonton. And it presents a very rosy picture of things in Alberta. And certainly, if you search on the internet, I think there's a high degree of association between the word clean tech and the word energy. So Candice and Stefan, you both mentioned other sectors, but really energy is the one sector where clean tech seems to be very strongly aligned. So with that in mind, would you say that Alberta is on a trajectory to become a hub for clean tech in Canada? So what's the state of clean tech in Alberta right now? And what do you see as the future of clean tech in this province?
I love that you use the word hub. I think that we're seeing a lot of people taking advantage of the opportunities that are presented. Edmonton, the city of Edmonton, the larger regional area, is working to establish itself as the hydrogen hub of Canada. They're taking advantage of the opportunities and the technologies and the natural resources here to have a cleaner source of fuel. And we're seeing conferences. There's 2 conferences that are happening this spring in Edmonton around hydrogen technologies, hydrogen fuel technology, dual fuel, diesel hydrogen dual fuel technologies. I think that that's kind of the key. It's having the fortitude to decide this is a path that we want to go down. Maybe it's not a permanent path, but maybe it's an interim solution, and we're going to chase it. And we're going to make sure that there's jobs and that there's a way for our economy to be prosperous as we transition. I think that there's a bit of a foregone conclusion that we have to transition away from fossil fuels. I have mixed feelings on that. I think that there's better ways of creating energy for home heating. But we have a long way to go with developing an alternative for transportation fuels. And as a sector, the oil and gas industry I do see movement. I do see them looking for those next opportunities, looking for those transitions. And I think it's going to take more of that. I think that we're going to see different types of technologies emerge as what the next best thing is for the Alberta economy. There's a lot going on in the ag tech sector. There's a lot of companies that we see coming through the accelerator programming that are looking at agriculture and better ways to do soil conservation and water conservation and increase crop yields. Those companies are going to solve problems that are going to be future problems caused by climate change. They're going to be able to increase crop yields in Alberta to offset crop yields that are lost in areas where there's severe drought or severe storms. So I think we need to really embrace the bigger picture of what talents we have and what we can do. It is a young economy. It's an emerging economy in Alberta. And I think that, when we're looking at how we want to invest government funding, how we want to invest industry funding, we need to look at what are those problems going to be, not just in 10 years, not 20 years, not just to reach net zero. I think that there's a lot of focus on net zero goals because that's what's been put out there as the problem to solve. There's so many more problems to solve, and everything that we work on and every project that we undertake that has a net environmental benefit helps everyone else. It helps us all get closer to net zero and helps change the mindset and help change the mind of consumers and offers them better alternatives.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to jump in there?
Sure. Maybe on the Alberta front, I see, Stephanie, you said something about, what our talents are and what we're good at and how that can really position Alberta as a hub for clean tech. I used to lead the clean tech team at Alberta Innovates. And so we were focused on a lot of that sort of early stage, bioenergy and electricity and hydrogen and a lot of these things. And one thing I always heard, and it struck me here is, this effort will be transformative for Alberta and our energy industry. All we've got to do is a little CCS on the side, and then we kind of move on. And then we, talk about petrochemicals or circular economy. And they're like, oh yeah, we'll just do a little CCS. We'll be fine. And it just struck me, who's doing CCS and are we ready? And are we ready at the scale that we need to be to support a lot of this? And I really do see technologies like CCS underpinning a lot of our ability to do many layers of clean tech. And so I made a move into this industry, and it's really exciting because to me, I see it every day. I see this emissions reductions. We're putting 4,000 tons a day underground in our geology today. And what's probably even more exciting about that is that I think we're actually starting to build this ecosystem of industries that collaborate, because this is one of the areas where you have to collaborate to get the job done. You have to have capture entities working alongside transportation entities, working alongside sequestration entities, and all of the other people who can potentially develop utilization strategies or direct air capture strategies or other, direct carbon removal strategies. Everyone's going to have to work together to put all of these pieces. And so I think if we can get that right, if we can get that collaboration right, if we can have companies sort of looking at that cross-sectoral lens, how do we put these pieces together? We've got a lot going for us in Alberta to do a fantastic job of it. But again, we've got to start now. And I think the other piece that I think a lot about in Alberta is scale. We get a lot of attention on kind of, I call them like shiny gold objects, in a box that we all want to play with, especially around some of the utilization, which is emerging in very early stage. But I hear a lot of conversation around, okay, well, this neat technology is going to, reduce 1,000 tons a year. And it's like, whoa, like, great, that's addressing a small part, and we need all of these tools. But we also need the big scale stuff to happen. We need that big scale stuff to get going so that as these emerging technologies that are doing the small amounts of reductions can kind of proliferate and address the other pieces that are more difficult to abate. So I think, again, we've got to balance that silver buckshot idea is so important so that we get time and scale and all of these things that need to happen going so we can meet our goals.
Yeah. Candice, I think just to kind of build on what you're saying, I think one of the things that I've observed here as well is that we do, I want to use the term capture, right? And it's that the oil and gas industry certainly has captured a lot of the both policy and investment in Alberta. Now, is that surprising? No, it's not. That's the province's bread and butter, right? So of course it makes logical sense, but at times I think that's almost been to the detriment of other sectors. I'll just give you an example. Like last year was downtown talking. So we had a visitor here that I hosted from Germany, and she said to me, "Hey, I want to come and look at biogas in Alberta," right? And I said, "Oh yeah, let's talk about biogas in Alberta," right? And Candice, I'm sure you looked at this Alberta Innovates, right? And had this conversation. We went and said, "Well, where's all the biogas?" We looked at BC and said, "Well, Fortis has bought up all the RNG in British Columbia." Okay. And downtown talked to me, "Well, what do you think about RNG? What's RNG?" Right? Like literally the company saying, "Well, I've never heard of this concept," right? And so to a certain extent, we have to think about how to bring some extra oxygen into the room, right? So that some of these other innovations can come out. And part of that is also sort of the policy and the framework, right? And giving people some certainty. And I think there was a question here, last one of the questions about, do politics matter here? And I think they do, right? Because one of the key things, if we look back at sort of past waves of innovation, is you have to create an environment that's conducive to this sort of innovation. And part of the environment where you see that happening is sort of disruption, right? That there's some change that's being forced, right? Because if there's no change being forced, we're just going to do what we always do. We do that very well. Right. But if we have to actually have an external force of change applied, and that has to be a consistent expectation that change is going to be happening for people to come in and try something different, try something new, try to solve a problem.
I'm glad you brought up the question that was in the chat about politics and policy and how it affects clean tech. I think we see these large scale policies that say, we have these net zero goals, or we're going to invest this much money in clean tech and innovation. But what we don't get into are the details of how those policies work and how they conflict with each other. I've recently been working with a company that is doing a hydrogen dual fuel technology. And this particular COO is interested in doing a pilot project. She wants to drive one of these vehicles on a highway. And she's like, "Well, what are the Transport Canada regulations on it?" Well, they don't exist. And so we have one government saying, "Here, we want to fund this program. We want to focus on this particular technology," but they're not collaborating with each other, and they're not enabling the technology to go to commercialization because there's no regulation in place that allows for the technology. And that's just one of many examples. We'll see grant applications saying, here we have this great, tremendous amount of funding, but here are the caveats. And there's often, this long laundry list of things that the ventures have to qualify for. And might be one thing that tosses their application. And we need to approach this better. If people have good ideas, and if they have a viable product that's generating some revenue, and they need to get to the next step, then we need to make sure that governments are allowing them to do this, that they're not the ones actually inhibiting the growth of these companies.
Back to the Alberta part of this, something that Stephanie said early on was important. Yeah, energy underlies everything we do, so we're well positioned to look at that, but we need to eat as well. And so ag tech and doing things better as the climate changes with less impact. There are other things besides CO2 that are the consequences of basically technology and the build out that we've done. So part of and this comes back to, so again, we're well positioned there. But what strikes me often is we've inherited governmental organizations where there's a minister who looks after the environment stuff, and another one who thinks about energy and natural resources, and you got another one on agriculture and so forth. And so you have your mandate. It would be more productive if we were doing a global optimization, let's say, rather than a series of local ones, which sometimes can work at cross purposes.
Maybe there's one other thing I wanted to pick up on that Stephanie sort of twigged for me. One of the cool things about Alberta, our bread and butter is oil and gas, as you said, Sean. But what I think sometimes we need to think about is when we solve those problems, what does it actually set us up to bring into Alberta? And some of the really interesting conversations we're having at Enhance is with companies that exist elsewhere in the world that have never existed in Alberta. And they call us up because they say, hey, if you can provide certainty around carbon management, we want to be where you are. And so there's this potential that if we can do carbon management really well across the full value chain in Alberta, there's going to be new industries that come here that aren't located here because of our natural resources or because of our traditional industries. And that's a real opportunity for us here, I think, to bring innovation, to bring totally different possibilities to our province. And again, we need to be in a position where we can offer that certainty and that carbon management potential for them.
Candice, I'm so happy to hear you say carbon management, because we've had departmental discussions. We said, how about we have a carbon management degree, a carbon management engineer? And there's a question in the chat about what kind of upskilling is possible. But yeah, that's a very interesting way to look at certainly the next several decades is how are we dealing with carbon no matter what industry you're in?
So I'd like to follow up on something you said, Candice, and that is about this buckshot approach. And if you look in the Q&A, there's a question that that indicates that a buckshot approach is good, but with so many new options, what or who is required to lead the change for the most effective technology? So who champions the most effective technologies? And the term that was used was avoid paralysis by analysis. So when you have that buckshot approach, who decides which one of those approaches is the one that's going to follow through?
From a practical standpoint, it's the investment community. We rely on angel investors and venture capitalists to get these ideas going. So you have to have a solid pitch to a community, and someone has to say, I think that's going to be the next best thing. I want to work with you. I want to be your seed funding. I want to get you going on this idea. Ultimately, it's a consumer-driven market. So you have to have a customer, you have to have support to get going. So for companies to be viable, for these buckshot approaches to work, there has to be adoption of these technologies, whether it's an industry in Canada or the US or in Europe, overseas, anywhere, we have to have customers. And that customer base is going to determine who's successful and which technologies are really the ones that survive and are picked to be the next generation.
And Stephanie, I think that the flip side of that is we also have to recognize most companies will fail, right? Like if we are successful, you have to start many things, and then you have to let the market choose, and you have to set the framework in which these entities and these innovations can become successful, but many of them will fail, right? I think there was a nice, since we mentioned an IEA analysis, one of my friends and ex-colleagues at the IEA did an analysis last year of 650 clean tech startups in 2009 to 2010. And 80% of those never received, after they got there, I think at that period, they were looking at angel series A and B. And after that period in time, 80% of those companies never received a further round of investment, right? That's the nature. We can do better by creating like that report, for example, pointed out that some of these things didn't work. Because, for example, for EV companies, right, one that wanted to do battery swapping, it was just too early, right? Everyone had expected Waxman Markey was happening at that time in the United States. We're going to have climate, all kinds of stuff's going to go on. That didn't happen. So kind of expectation shifted. The policy wasn't there. But if we create, again, that sort of consistent set of pressures that and market forces and allow the market, sort of the forces to be generative that allow for success, we can do that. But there will be many, no matter the best we do, will fail, right?
Yeah, and we say fail as though it was a bad thing. No, let the 1,000 flowers bloom, and we'll just see. But if you only plant 3 seeds, then you can't afford to fail. So I really like this whole shifting the mindset: innovate, test, try, develop, and what works will emerge, and the money will follow. We do need the consumer nudges, but from the tech side, that's what we need to be doing.
And I think I just want to hammer on one word Sean said is the framework, right? Don't do analysis by paralysis or paralysis by analysis. Set an outcome that we're driving towards and the rules around it. if we're driving towards GHG emissions reductions, what are our other considerations on the environment, land, water? We've got good regulatory systems, and then move and then let the market decide. I don't think being prescriptive around the how or which technologies we don't have the, excuse me, Stefan, we don't have the foresight to pick the winners. Set the outcomes, set the rules, and then go and let companies try to tackle those problems, and the market will decide.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. We only have a few minutes left, so possibly the last question I'm going to ask is, this session is entitled Cleantech Engineering a Healthier Planet. And we've heard today about certain challenges, and we've heard about opportunities here related to cleantech. So could each of you please comment, no more than a minute, please, on how you imagine cleantech will make the planet a more healthy place in the next 20 years? $30 years?
Okay, I'll go first if you guys can think, and I'll muddle my way through here. To me, clean tech, when it starts to integrate with our existing systems, it's that integration. I talked about the collaboration. When we think about carbon management, it's got to be a much broader discussion than just GHGs, than just a single sector. And I think the theme of all of my comments has been this kind of silver buckshot. It's got to be an and conversation. There's so many problems to tackle that we need to see carbon management as something that's just integrated into everything that we do. And I think clean tech then becomes the automatic. We will find solutions to address, all of the problems that bubble up, but we have to do it in an integrated way. We have to do it in a cross-sectoral way. And we have to look at sort of all of those opportunities for collaboration along a full value chain that let those integrated solutions flourish.
Thank you.
A follow-up, cleaner tech in the next 10, 20, 30 years will allow people to see, oh, we don't have to keep doing things the same way we've been doing it. We can not completely sacrifice our quality of life and yet have less impact on the environment. That's what I think the biggest difference will be, allowing us to realize we can change.
I totally agree with Stephen for once. I really think that when we're talking about the next, 20 years, even the next 10 years, it's about a change of mindset. We're already seeing products on the market that are sustainable proteins, meat alternatives. There's a big push in the market for those types of things, and they do have a net environmental impact. We're going to see those types of things in healthcare. We're going to see that in water security. Water security has always been kind of a tricky thing in Canada, but as we deal with climate change, water security and clean water, access to clean water is going to become more and more important. So for me, healthier environment and healthier planet also means healthier humans. So I think it's going to be a shift of focus on how we live and how we interact in the environment, and really educating and having a new generation of people that are being raised with sustainability and a conscientious lens to look at the environment as they grow and become educated and start their careers.
I would add, from my perspective, I think what clean tech is going to do is enable us to be more diverse in the way we do things and the way we get energy. So I think if you look at any sort of future scenarios, they're not like we see today with 80-ish, 90% of primary energy coming from fossil fuels. They actually have quite a diversity. And we look regionally, we become very much more interested in what resources we can have locally, right? Because we can't use fossil fuels in the same way we have been in the past, as I think everyone has said at some point in here. And I think the same way Stephen mentioned transportation, we're going to see a much more diverse set of transportation. It's going to become to meet our goals, whether they be from climate or from other environmental impacts, right? Local air pollution. We're going to have to see a more diverse set of transportation measures, right? Public transport, modal shifts to train, to bicycle, to walking more and walking friendly communities. So I think there's a lot of these tech tech will help support, clean tech can help support some of these transitions and make these things possible that we keep seeing in models and people talking about the future. But that's what will enable us, I think, in many cases to have this more sort of diverse and regionally specific system that still functions together, right, around the world.
Okay, and thank you for your perspectives. And with that, I'm looking at the clock. I think this is a great place to end the conversation today. And certainly it's a topic that I think we could maintain a conversation for the rest of the day. And I apologize for all the questions we weren't able to get to in the Q&A. But I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of you panelists for taking time out of your busy schedules to share your knowledge and your perspectives. And I certainly learned a lot, and I hope the audience did too. And I would also like to thank everyone watching in the audience today for your attention and for your thoughtful questions. So right now I'm going to pass it back to our Dean, Dr. Bill Rosehart, for some closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Aaron, for hosting what was a wonderful discussion here today. And thank you to the panelists as well for adding your insight and expertise and certainly making it interesting. And Stephen, you started with your first statement, certainly made it an interesting discussion today. As Aaron said, thank you for everyone who's joined us here today. And we hope you've enjoyed yourself, and that we'll see you at our next Schulich Connects, which is scheduled for April 28th and is entitled The 5G Future. As a reminder, it's also coming up to Giving Day 2022, which will be held on Thursday, April the 21st. And any gifts made from April 1st until the 21st will be considered as a Giving Day contribution. And all eligible gifts will be matched dollar for dollar in the same area, up to a maximum of $2,500 per gift. So until then, thank you again for joining us for Schulich Connects, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.